on my slide here, you have the cover of The Economist from about 6 years ago, where The Economist estimated that about 100 million women and girls are missing in the world. The United Nations now estimates that about 200 million women and girls are missing because of sex-selective abortion or neglect in the first 5 years. And 200 million is a very big number. That would mean, for example, that we would have no women living in the United States at all, because there's about 400 million people living in the US. So I'm starting with this kind of to remind us that, yes, we will talk about economic opportunity today, primarily, and we'll talk a lot about what businesses can do, but we should care because gender equality is a human right, and for some people, gender equality really is a question of life and death. But I don't want to end kind of on a sobering note, but I also start with this because I want to tell you about one of my favorite research studies, which was conducted by a colleague of mine, Rob Jensen, who thought that he's also an economist, a development economist, who thought that even on a thorny issue, such as this one, maybe an economist has something to contribute. And he asked a very simple question. Do even the poorest of the poor care about returns on investment? So if we increased economic opportunities for these girls, would parents then treat them better? And that's what he studied. He studied in India because in the 90s, many of the call centers moved into India and preferably hired women. And what he did was he ran an experiment. He offered training in 200 villages, meaning he hired somebody who offered the training in 200 villages for women to go and work in call centers. And then he had 200 control villages where he didn't offer that kind of training. And he measured not just whether women in these villages then were more likely to go and work, but also whether parents in these villages treated their 0 to 5-year-old girls in a different way, because now they saw that a few women had economic opportunities. And that's exactly what he found. This is a 10-year experiment, it's a long experiment, but he could show that survival chances of these 0 to 5-year-old girls literally dramatically increased in those 10 years. He worked at a hospital, they measured body mass indices, they measured likelihood of being in school, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the reason we care. Right? Economic opportunities are important, and yes, we care about the female CEOs and the women on boards, and we do care about women in leadership, but we really care because of these 200 million women and girls who are missing. So the question is whether somebody like her could make it in this world. And some of you probably know who she is. She is, of course, the first female head of state of an African country, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. But let me take you back to a different part of the world. This is another woman I'd like to introduce to you. Her name is Heidi Roizen, and she's a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. And Heidi became a bit more famous a few years ago because a colleague of mine at the Harvard Business School wrote a case study on her. A typical kind of case study that I'm sure you are also using at the Gordon Institute and at many other places around the world, where we use a protagonist kind of to share some broader insights about kind of business strategies with our students. And the case was interesting because after the original case was written about Heidi Roizen, that's her real name, some of us took this case and replaced Heidi's name with Howard. And we now use this case to talk to our students about the power of our stereotypes and our biases in our classes. So what we now do is we give half of our students, so 400 students at the Harvard Business School, get the case of the protagonist being called Howard. The other half gets the case of the protagonist being called Heidi, and everything else being identical. And then they read the case, how they built their enterprises, how they invested in Silicon Valley companies, etc. And then at the end, students also respond to a questionnaire asking them to evaluate how well Heidi and Howard did. And what we find time and again, sadly, is that we agree that both Heidi and Howard did a good job, but we do not like Heidi. We do not want to hire her and wouldn't want to work with her because Heidi defies our stereotypes of what a typical venture capitalist looks like, and also our stereotypes of what a good woman does. Right? A good woman is not strategic, she's not assertive, she's not kind of making a lot of money in her case. So that's what we're up against, right? This is the power of implicit bias, or what we sometimes also refer to as seeing is believing. And this, of course, is not a woman's issue. It's also true that, and that's a true story that I talk about in my book, the first time I dropped off my 4-month-old son at a Harvard daycare center, the person I had to hand my baby to was a man, and I thought, I'm gonna die. Of course, he turned out to be wonderful and all of that, but I couldn't help my gut reaction in the moment.